please welcome Kenesa Ahmad, board member and co-founder of Women in Security and Privacy, and panelists for The Future of Privacy and Breakthrough Technologies.
Hello, everyone. Oh, sorry. Tell me as I'm climbing up on this very high chair. Thank you for joining us today. We have an excellent panel ahead of us, and I'm going to get right into it, into introductions. So I'm going to pass it on to, there we go, Eva.
Hi, good afternoon. You guys have lasted the full day. This is Eva Velasquez. I'm the president and CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center. We're a nonprofit organization that provides no-cost services to victims of identity theft, cybercrime, scams and fraud, even data breach remediation for the individual consumer. So I'm really happy to be here. ITRC has been around for 20 years and glad to be a part of this conversation.
I'm Brendon Lynch. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Microsoft, where I've spent many years dealing with various aspects of our work, whether it's in leading our governance program or advising our product teams on what capabilities to build for consumers and for organizations. And increasingly, I'm spending a lot of my time working with our organizational customers who are increasingly leveraging cloud services and artificial intelligence and ensuring that we build privacy by design into that.
And I'm Kimberly Nevala, and I'm a strategic advisor at SAS, or SAS as we tend to call it. And I'm really responsible for working with our customers to help them understand what are the business opportunities, but also what are the real implications and requirements for leveraging emerging technologies such as AI or advanced analytics. So I spend a lot of time helping customers think through their data and analytic strategies. What does that actually need to, how do those need to morph over time to accommodate and support these new technologies?
All right, so let's start with an overview of the current state of AI today. I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit about some of the incredible, amazing, beneficial things that AI does for us today? Who'd like to start?
Sure, I guess I'll start at this end. Well, I actually, I brought it because this morning I got this article and I thought it was kind of awesome. It says, AI can now decode words directly from your brainwaves using deep learning. Now, you get into the details, you have to actually be having brain surgery to make that happen. You know, there are such an incredible amount of things, and I think there are examples in every walk of industry, but I'll also maybe call out just a few from healthcare in particular, and a few instances that I think can highlight some of the privacy and security issues that we have. Today, we have this amazing capability to take things like medical history and clinical records and marry that in real time with information coming off a sensor and actually predict when a patient is at risk or developing sepsis. And we can do that hours, and in some cases, with infections for infants in the NICU, sometimes days before a clinical symptom is going to apply. So now we have the opportunity to actually treat these things when we can actually positively affect the outcome. We're able to take that same kind of clinical and biomedical information and marry it with biometric information about how you move to understand and diagnose things like neuromuscular diseases and what state of progression you're at in that disease for things like Parkinson's. But we can also do things like, and there was a recent story, you guys may have seen it, looking at pictures of people's faces and expressions and with a fair degree of perhaps somewhat what I find sort of unsettling accuracy, predict whether someone is prone to depression, or if someone with manic depression is about to have a manic episode. Now, we'll come back to this because there's actually really good uses and really bad uses of that information. So I think that's where the rubber hits the road when it comes to AI and privacy and security.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think those are great examples, and I think a lot of this is a really an opportune time because of these advances in technology, the power of cloud computing, the availability of data, because that's really what powers a lot of AI. And so there's a lot of examples, I think, in healthcare. There's many of the world's challenging problems that can really benefit from AI at a societal level. It may be around poverty or the environment, healthcare examples you've heard. Maybe to narrow it down to a particular class of AI and technology, I'll use facial recognition. Again, because it has positive uses and some challenges which we'll probably talk about later. But just imagine, if you could, the ability for a young missing child to be found as she's being walked down the street. Imagine the ability for a blind person to be made aware of who is entering the room and joining a meeting. Imagine maybe a terrorist who's hell-bent on destruction being identified walking into a sports arena that you're at. Those are examples of, I think, positive uses of AI, in this case facial recognition, that really do provide a lot of promise to transform society.
I really don't have that much to add because they covered it very broadly, but I will say, as a nonprofit organization, I think there are opportunities here for us as well. So it's not just industry that needs to examine this. How can we use it, as long as it's being used for good and we are taking these things into consideration? I think AI can have some real potential for nonprofit organizations that are trying to do all that good out in the world, referenced, poverty and hunger and those types of efforts.
Thank you. So that was a really nice overview of all the wonderful things that AI does. And I think you know where this is going. I want to talk about the flip side. So when I think about AI and what could go wrong, I think about all the unintended inferences that could be made. And so I'd like to hear from the panelists.
I need to start with this one because Skynet, everybody. Hello.
Yeah. We'll get there. Yeah, how innovations such as AI facial recognition that we've been just discussing, how they present new privacy, security, and other related challenges.
You want to build on that?
I think I just said it. Everybody's seen the movie. The unintended consequence, can this get out of our control as it's collecting all of this information? And are we monitoring and making sure that we know what's being collected and how it's being used, or are we letting this just right off the rails?
Right. Yeah, and I think when I look at it, it's in some ways, it's easy to kind of get excited and say, oh, this is so new and these risks are so new. In reality, there is definitely some newness to this, but we've been through this before. We've known that generally tools, can have good uses and bad uses. A hammer can be used to help build a house. It can be used to really hurt somebody. Technology is no different in that way. And so there's a lot of capability here, and the question is not just what can technology do, what should it do? And there are definitely some examples of where these things could go wrong. If I stick with my facial recognition examples, you could imagine a world where everywhere you've walked in public spaces in the last month has been captured without your knowledge or permission, by a government agency. Or you could imagine the building of a database of everyone who attended a political rally. Or maybe it's in a shopping mall that all the stores have collected and shared data with each other around what you're looking at in the shelves, what you've purchased, and you have no control over that. So there's many, I think, nefarious or creepy uses of these technologies that we need to address.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, and I think it's a conversation that, as you said, has probably been evolving over a couple of years, but I think that we have a tendency a lot of times when we're thinking about, and I've worked in sort of the data governance space for longer than anyone should, and I care to admit, but early on when we talked about data privacy or even data security, we really focused on PII, for instance. What's personally identifiable information? What's my social security? What's my name? Things like that, right? And today, I think we really do have to challenge ourselves, both as consumers to educate ourselves, but also as organizations in thinking about what is sensitive and private information, because with AI and ML, not only are we using things that I like to say it's sort of inherent, right, my face, and unless I'm a hermit and I'm non-technologically connected, I don't have the option of leaving this out, right? So that's an interesting sort of challenge. But also there are things that we can infer from information, right, about my habits, my preferences, and at a global or an aggregate scale, we might be pretty accurate. Sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's not at an individual level that we don't necessarily think about broadly. So I think as we move forward with these technologies as well, it's not just about protecting the sort of common identifying information, and GDPR starts to go here a little, but how do we think about what are those inferred, insights that are also sensitive and private and that need to be, so it may not just be the core data, but it's the insight itself that is that piece that we need to start thinking about. So when it comes to security and privacy today and in the future, our traditional view of PII is it's the tip of the iceberg, and in some ways it's the easy part.
Thank you for that. So I think that one thing that we didn't cover at the beginning of this panel is the fact that, when we're talking about AI, I think we often think of it in this box as this technology that just runs on its own. But obviously there are humans that are involved in the interpretation of whatever comes from that technology. And Ava, you come from a interesting consumer perspective. I'm curious, with these emerging technologies, AI and machine learning, what's the role for industry in this? What in managing consumer expectations and protecting consumer privacy and security?
I'm hopeful that they embrace the privacy by design, the thought of as they are embarking on these projects, new projects. And I will say this is not just industry, it's all of us that are actually trying to make big changes in the world. Some is for profit, some is to solve social problems, but we all have to step back at the beginning and add the privacy by design philosophy as part of the overall user and consumer experience. We're kind of segmenting it out, going, this is a really important piece and we have to be very conscientious of it and the unintended consequences. But I think about it as all part of that whole continuum, because at the end of the day, when people feel that their privacy has been violated, they will not engage with you. That's part of that user experience. So hopefully we can have this sort of philosophical change about how we bring this in. I mean, AI is just another part of the technologies that we're doing this with. And I think it's worth mentioning that as an organization, we are looking at some of these different opportunities, and we are looking at AI. Can it help us to do a better job with helping the victims that we're helping on a daily basis? Really consider that. We know how important it is that we respect their privacy. We know how important it is that we continue to keep our reputation for being really sensitive about the people that we're helping. So as we explored, can we do this and how can we do this? I mean, we started with that very question. We didn't just jump into it and go, wow, this is so great. Look at all the cool stuff that you can do with this. It was very much the building blocks. Should we do this? Is this an appropriate use? What is the benefit? Can we do this in a way that's privacy centric, that isn't collecting more data than we need, and that is still respecting the people that we're helping?
So Kimberly and Brendon, I'm curious to hear a bit about what you think about individuals' perspectives as privacy continues to evolve. And we've heard from other panelists today about the different legislative movements that are under tow. We've talked a little bit about how to address privacy in your organization, but there's this larger societal undercurrent. And so how do you think that individuals' perspectives will continue to evolve? And do you think that with these advancements, these new innovations, that customers' perspectives needs to be informed by industry, and what is industry's role in that?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's the need to, I think, for industry to continue to do a good job on design, and then really also think about how individuals can be empowered with this. And this is through things like transparency and control over their data. It gets quite challenging in many of these scenarios to explain them. What does this algorithm do? Thank you for the help with that. But there are people definitely engaged. One example, we put in place a privacy dashboard for our consumer customers to be able to access and control things like their search history, their browsing history, their location data. And this in part, helped us with our GDPR compliance because it really gets at the core data subject rights of GDPR. But we decided to launch this globally last May. And looking at the data, it's quite interesting. We've actually had 10 million people, more than 10 million people now, access that portal and have control over their data. 4 million of those were here in the United States, 2.9 million in Europe, and 3.7 million in the rest of the world. So there is, I think, people are getting engaged for sure, and taking advantage of these capabilities. And so I think that's a key thing that industry can do. How much can we empower people to take control, as long as at the same time is being really accountable and taking a socially responsible approach, both through design and deployment of these technologies, which is something we spend a lot of time on. And then I think the third thing that industry can do is advocate for strong rules to be in place, because that's, we've talked a lot about it today, but a regulatory floor, whether it's baseline privacy legislation, or perhaps even regulating the misuses of facial recognition, that type of thing, could actually be beneficial in building trust into the broad ecosystem and enabling people to embark and get on using these technologies and get all those advantages that we talked about earlier, because we know that people will not use technology they do not trust.
Yeah, and we definitely see that growth in consumers who want to take control and are also in their awareness. We did a survey of some consumers late last year, just relative to understanding people's changing perceptions after GDPR, and it was very interesting because I think well over 80% came back and told us that, compared to even a year ago, they were a lot more concerned about their information and a lot less secure in their feelings about trust. They also came back and said things like, yeah, we, by and large, right, want the ability to know how that data is being used and shared, or the ability to delete it. So you can see sort of an informed consumer base that over time will start to drive maybe other changes and maybe partner, I would hope would partner with industry and technology. I will say, that being said, I also have an incredibly large distributed family, and I have had the occasion wasn't too long ago where somebody said to me in just all due faith, and said she was really upset about information that was available about her on the internet, in that she Googled herself, and all of her siblings' names and their spouses came up, and she was horrified. And I, not being a very good relation or friend possibly, didn't have the heart to tell her about that was really the least of her concerns in terms of the type of information that companies have. So sometimes I do think that we overestimate, because we tend to work in informed circles, some of the broader awareness of that issue. And I pulled my phone out because I can never pronounce her name without actually looking at it. Zeynep Tufekci, and I apologize again because I pronounced your last name wrong, is really articulate, I think, or articulated this really well, that one of the issues with AI and ML is that it's not even unintended use that's the problem. It's that when we get consent from consumers today about using their information, allow me to share it and use it, we don't actually even know how we're going to apply it and use it, which means that we can't actually ask for a truly informed consent, because how do you ask for consent for a usage that you may not even know? And in a lot of cases, as a consumer, as an individual, we want you to provide those, those services and all of those things that help us and use the data to drive that. But there's also the other side of it, which is, again, back to, it's not just, I might be a little bit concerned if you are looking at my facial expressions and I'm just not very expressive, or you're looking at my speech patterns. And for most people, a fast rate of speech means you're nervous. For me, that just means it's a regular day at the office. I'm a fast talker. And so how are those things, being applied? But because we don't always know what insights we're going to use and how to apply them, this idea, the whole informed consent model today is potentially broken. Now, we don't necessarily have an answer for that today, but I think it's something that we need to look at. And again, I shared at the media panel this morning, one of the things to your point about a baseline floor of regulation is Zainab often uses the analogy of there's certain things that I hope we will be able to fundamentally just agree to. And she says it's like lead paint, right? At least here in the States, where maybe some people want to use lead paint, but we've sort of categorically agreed that this is not an okay usage. And then there's other things that we get to make our own decisions about. So it's an interesting analogy and one I've been pondering a little bit more.
Great, thank you. So there's one thing that you just mentioned that I think ties nicely to our last closing question. You mentioned that you're using a survey, or was that with some of your customers, about how to gauge awareness? I'm seeing that across my customers, clients, the same thing, that there's just a far higher level of awareness than I've ever seen before. We work with large companies and also startups, even with startups wanting to put out a survey before training to be able to estimate whether their staff is actually listening, but also if they are aware of the privacy changes that the companies are making. And so that's one little way of measuring your progress with privacy. But I'm curious, we're all going to go back to our clients, customers, to our own organizations and try to make privacy work where we work. And if you could pick one or two things that would help enable a culture of privacy that we could all take back with us, what would that be? For whoever wants to start.
I will happily start that. I think, for me, I'm very fortunate, I think, to work at a company, and there are, a number of companies that have a real top-down approach. So that's the starting place, I would say, is really leadership from the very top of the company is what is really a key driver of, it's a driver of culture regardless, and I think it's definitely a key driver. If you need to drive a privacy-aware, privacy by design culture right through your organization, you really need to start at the top and have that come down, because that's where priorities get set. For example, over the last few years, as we were building that dashboard I spoke of, and as we were readying for GDPR, we have a regular meeting with the CEO and the full leadership team to report where we're going and how on track we are, where we need additional resources, that kind of thing. And it really does, that permeates right through the organization. And people know privacy is a priority and we've got to go get after it. You asked for two things, didn't you? I think, the other one would probably be measurement, really, just people are incented by numbers. Privacy is often a hard thing to put metrics on. But I think really establishing what are your listening systems for it, to tap into your customer support department, understand, tap into social media, what are people saying, what, that are direct customers and others, use signals, as many signals as you can, as well as do your own surveys to really understand sentiment and what people's challenges and concerns are, and then use that to obviously drive change.
Yeah, I think those are both great points. I think, again, just that idea of really engaging in a literacy program and around the idea of data security and privacy, and allowing people to start and engaging in a conversation around how perspectives are changing or things that they need to be considering, and then empowering people as projects on a case-by-case basis go to really incent them to start asking those questions up front. Is this intended data that we want to collect, or the way that we want to use it, really in line with what we have established as our, maybe our collective or corporate objectives and principles? And does this actually align with what the consumer or our customer might reasonably have expected or thought our intention or our intended use was going to be? And if we start asking those questions, I think sooner in the process, and just educating people about the broader issues, a lot of stuff can start to happen. We can start from the top down, but we can start to meet it from the bottom up as well. And by the way, there's plenty of technology things that we can do, but Merritt highlighted some of those, so I'm not going to go there yet.
In the interest of time, I'll only bring up one, but mainly because those are really great, and I would endorse both of or everything that you guys were saying. You know, from a small business perspective, for organizations that are really just starting to have the conversation, I think you kind of have to start with the basics. And so I would encourage as companies, if you haven't had a conversation about privacy, if you're still in the infancy of grappling with these issues, like what is the difference between security and privacy? Everyone in this room knows that they are different issues that are vastly or that are totally intertwined, but people just starting out, small businesses maybe aren't thinking about that. So I would take for yourself and your staff, just define what privacy is. What do you think it means from a person on a personal level, from your customer's perspective, and then from a business perspective. And then you can start to build it in from the top down about what does privacy mean for our company. But I think the folks need to have that conversation and define it at least.
Can I build on that briefly? I think that, what does it mean is really crucial too. Like every company in some way is becoming a data company, right? Data's being collected more than it was. Data's being put to good use in pursuit of your mission, whatever that may be. And so I think there's a real opportunity to tie your privacy work directly to the mission of your company through data and through being able to enable both the greater utility of data, but in a way that's also a responsible use of data that really gets to your brand as well and the trust with your customers. So I think really tying it to that can help in the cultural change as well.
That was my second one. We planned that ahead of time.
Thank you so much. Open it up to questions. If you have a question, there are 2 microphones on either side.
I guess I get the first one. Tom Pendergast from Media Pro, a little too tall for this mic. Brendon, this one's for you. You have 10 million people who visited your privacy center. What a great usability study you've got there. What did you learn as you saw the kinds of questions people asked and the kind of actions that they took? It strikes me that that has a lot to tell us collectively about how we design the way that users interact with our privacy policies.
Yeah, sure. I'll clarify a little bit. This is a sort of a self-service portal where people can log in with your Microsoft account and get real-time access to various data types that are tied directly to the account, right? Like if your search history, your browse history, those kinds of things. And so what those folks did were take various actions on that. Some of them just viewed the data. Others decided to export some of it. Others decided to delete some of it. And I guess in the fullness of time, we can start to sort of analyze, customers in this country seem more interested in taking a copy of it. In this country, they might be more interested in deleting it, whatever it may be. But in addition, we have something called a Privacy Response Center, which is a portal where people can ask questions. And I think that really gets to the heart of your question as well. And we analyze that data. So many times it's frankly asking a question that we've already got covered somewhere in our privacy statement or in an FAQ. And it's pointing people to that information, and it's giving us insights about how we can improve our transparency mechanisms. Sometimes it might be them asking for a more complex access to data than they can find on the portal, and we can learn from that. Or it might be that they think they've been attacked in some way through a phishing scheme or whatever it may be. So there's a wide range of things that come in through that, but it's one of the that's why I sort of reference customer support as an example of a listening post for you to understand what your customers are dealing with.
Hi guys, this is Emily Dreyfus from Wired. Thank you so much. You've, over the course of today, and the 3 of you have mentioned how companies are collecting more and more data, and by doing that, private information, all data in some way can become private information, and from something that may seem harmless, like me buying a few things, like my buying habits. A company is able to glean massive insights about who I am as a person, where I am in my life, and people are having increased awareness about that. So I guess my sort of cynical question to you is, given that data is so profitable and is so useful for companies who are trying to target their customers better and who are trying to deliver a product in a more helpful or convenient way, and therefore are collecting more and more of that data, is that practice and that sort of underpinning of data in our industries really compatible with privacy by design? And I guess I am curious, because I think that in some ways, privacy by design would really mean, in some instances, collecting less information, which I don't know if that's possible.
I think one of the things when people say, what are some of the changes to even privacy or perspectives on data that AI and ML and these kind of things have driven, is an increased appetite for companies to collect information, sometimes just in case, and sometimes because it seems innocuous and they think there might be something interesting to do with it later. The problem is it's incredibly hard to resist the temptation to do really interesting things with it later, and sometimes that's good or bad. I think that we also, though, sometimes think that just because we've collected the data, that like data once seen can never be unseen or deleted. I think as we move forward, we will see that consumers and the segment of consumers that are informed are going to want the right to tell you what they think is appropriate for you to glean and what information they want to see back in terms of products and services. I think there was the consumer study that we did was much smaller, but there was a PwC study done last year as well. And I think they found that 9 out of 10 of those consumers indicated that if we don't think you're using the information in a way that's trusted, or, in terms of that, now how much do they really understand about what the specifics of the data are, that we're going to basically vote with our wallets and our feet and go elsewhere. So I do think that's going to become a stronger incentive and push moving forward. It's not going to fix it everywhere, and it can't be the only part of the answer. There's a lot of things that potentially are out there already, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by assuming that we can't apply pressure or take better steps as corporations, or apply pressures as individuals to help not necessarily wind it back, but maybe moderate the use.
Yeah, I think I'm perhaps a bit more optimistic, but I do believe that market forces will play a big role, or do play a big role, because organizations are wanting to have a trust relationship with their customers, and increasingly there's data involved. It's not just that necessarily people are sweeping up data. Data's being just created because people are using these technologies, right? They're choosing to, because it's so much convenience and delivers so much goodness to them. So data's being created. Then it's about responsible use of that data, but I think very much empowering individuals to have control over that data. So can we do a better job on transparency and control to really give people power so they don't feel like they're being used in any way? And in part of that, I think, is a value exchange needed. It's not just about, have we got the right privacy practices built in? Does this data relationship I'm in provide me value as an individual? Because that's going to really, I think, play a big part in the trust equation for me as an individual as well. And then having strong laws and things play a role in really creating confidence for people that the data is going to be protected and used responsibly.
Yeah, and I think that's important. We tend to look at privacy and security, I think, like we used to look at governance as sort of a cost of doing business and bureaucratic and something we have to do, but leading organizations are now looking at this actually as a business opportunity to develop that and actually bring people in.
Okay, I swear I'll talk fast, but I have so much to say. 3 things. Is this wanting all of this data compatible with privacy? Yes, but it's very, very hard. Sort of like if I order that whole pizza and I'm by myself, I know it's all there, but I'm only going to use this much. Can I do it? Yeah, but it's really going to be a challenge. And then the second thing is, as far as data creators, we need to do a better job of educating the data creators, the consumers, that they don't own the data. They may be the creator, but they don't own it. Their jaws drop and hit the floor when I'm out doing community presentations, and I say that to them. They're like, really? It's not mine? Like, no, you made it, but you don't own it. And then
You can control it.
to a degree, you can control it. And then the last thing is, as far as are some things off the table? Yes, to your point about where's the lead paint, I do think that companies are going to have to step back and make some decisions about, no, we just can't collect and use that information. Not now.
Thank you very much. I think we only have about 15 seconds left, so not quite enough time for one more question, but you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much to our panelists for coming in, flying down today.
Thank you.
Please welcome Kelvin Coleman, Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, for closing remarks.
So if I could have your attention for one moment, I promise not to keep you long. I want to just thank our distinguished experts for sharing and engaging their insights with us today about the rapidly evolving opportunities and challenges of the privacy road ahead. It's just been a tremendous day. We intentionally put it a half a day so that we don't take up too much of your time, but enough time to really talk about these things in a thorough way. Again, many thanks to Visa and Verizon, our contributing sponsors. Thank you all so very much, as well as Trend Micro. I think Mitchell is still here, maybe dipped out. Mozilla, certainly Yubico, our nonprofit partners, Women in Security and Privacy. Kenesa, thank you so very much, wherever you are. Identity Theft Resource Center, Charity, Eva. We really, really appreciate your partnership. Call for Action, as well as our media partner, ITSP. Sean, thanks so very much. You've been a great friend to us. To the LinkedIn team, finally, we are so grateful, beyond grateful, for you hosting us here in your beautiful facility. Kalinda, really appreciate you and your staff. And I will say the LinkedIn media production team, A+. Thank you so very much. It was seamless. Yeah, it really was seamless. When you don't know they're there, that's when you know they're good, you know? Really appreciate that. The very last thing I'll do, I recognize some of my staff who are out here today. I forgot to recognize Lisa, my Director of Communications. I think she was downstairs. So Lisa, thank you for coming to support as well. That's it. I really want to thank you. Next year, we look forward to having it again. And remember, it's only one day, right? So we're also concerned about the other 364 days of the year. So the National Cybersecurity Alliance, we look forward to continuing our engagement with each and every last one of you as the nation's leading nonprofit in dealing with these issues. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. See you again soon.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for Data Privacy Day 2019.